I never thought love could change a person so completely, not in the way that reshapes your reflection, your voice, even the rhythm of your heartbeat when you catch sight of yourself in the mirror. But when I think back, I realize it didn't happen all at once. It began quietly, with my wife's gentle tone, her patient eyes, and the way she saw something in me that I couldn't yet admit existed. The first time she mentioned it, I laughed nervously, pretending I didn't understand. She had brushed my hair back one morning, the way she sometimes did after I'd let it grow longer than usual, and said softly, "You look so peaceful like this, you know that?" I shrugged, embarrassed by the warmth spreading across my face. It was such a small comment, yet it lingered with me the entire day, replaying again and again. She saw me more clearly than I saw myself. I used to think marriage meant you had to play roles: husband, wife, protector, nurturer. But love, real love, is stranger and deeper than that. It doesn't care about the script. It rewrites it entirely. My wife was the kind of woman who noticed everything, even the small ways I flinched when I was called sir, or how I seemed lighter, more alive, on the rare occasions when she'd let me try on something from her side of the closet, just for fun, she'd say. At first, it was just for fun, an experiment between laughter and curiosity. But each time, something shifted inside me, something fragile yet fierce, a truth I'd buried so deep that I didn't have words for it yet. I remember one evening, it was raining outside, the kind of soft drizzle that fills the world with a gray hush. I was standing in front of the mirror, wearing one of her sweaters, a pale lavender one that still carried her perfume. She came up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and whispered, "You look happier this way." It was the first time I didn't deny it. There's a moment when realization doesn't break you. It frees you. I turned around and met her eyes, expecting judgment, mockery, something cold. But she only smiled. "You've been fighting yourself for so long," she said. "What if you didn't have to?" That night, we talked for hours. About identity, about peace, about what it meant to finally breathe without guilt. She didn't push, she didn't persuade, she simply believed in me, and that was enough to start changing everything. Weeks passed, and with her gentle encouragement, I began exploring the version of myself I had always hidden. She helped me with small things, learning to walk differently, to carry myself with a kind of quiet grace that felt so natural it scared me. Every step was both terrifying and beautiful. But what truly changed me wasn't the clothes or the mannerisms. It was her unwavering love. She saw me before I did. And every day, she reminded me that being true to myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Then came the day she said she wanted to give me something I didn't even know how to ask for. She held my hands, looked straight into my eyes, and said, "I want to help you feel complete, not just on the inside." My breath caught. I didn't speak, couldn't. She squeezed my hand gently. "I know what this means to you," she said, "and I want to be part of it." That was the night she told me she had already begun saving. That she had been planning it quietly, not because she wanted to change me, but because she wanted to give me the choice to live without fear. For the first time in my life, I cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone loved me enough to see the person I was meant to be. And from that moment on, there was no turning back. The next morning felt strangely quiet. The world outside went on as usual. Traffic, neighbors, the faint sound of someone mowing their lawn. But inside our home, time felt suspended. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing circles on my coffee mug, still replaying her words from the night before. "I want to help you feel complete." I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, that steady warmth that made it impossible to doubt her. I wasn't sure what complete really meant yet, but I knew that I'd stepped across an invisible line. There was no pretending anymore. She joined me at the table wearing her favorite robe, soft and white like something out of a dream. Her hair was a little messy, her face free of makeup, but she looked radiant. "You didn't sleep," she said gently. I shook my head, forcing a small laugh. "Too much on my mind." She smiled knowingly. "Good. That means it matters." Then she sat across from me, took my hand, and began talking about plans, practical ones. It felt surreal hearing her speak about things I had never dared to think out loud. Names of specialists, consultations, steps that could make my outer self match the person I had always been inside. It wasn't fantasy anymore. It was real. Every detail she mentioned was spoken with care, as though she knew how fragile my courage still was. "You don't have to rush," she said. "I just want you to start imagining what happiness might look like if it were completely yours." That line stayed with me for days. What would happiness look like if it were completely mine? I began journaling, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. At first, the words came out clumsy, uncertain. But soon, they flowed, like I had been waiting my whole life to speak this language of self-recognition. I wrote about how freeing it felt to see myself not as an accident, but as someone slowly stepping into truth. And through it all, she was there, calm, grounded, my constant anchor. Some nights, we'd sit on the couch and she'd practice small things with me. Posture, breathing, gestures. She'd correct me softly, not as a teacher, but as a partner. One evening, she surprised me with a little box wrapped in gold ribbon. "Just something small," she said. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny heart pendant. It wasn't flashy, it was quiet, elegant, and somehow right. She clasped it around my neck, her fingers brushing against my skin. "Now you can look at yourself," she whispered, "and remember who you're becoming." I looked in the mirror that night longer than I ever had before. My reflection didn't just show my face, it showed a future, one I had never allowed myself to believe in. But the deeper I fell into this journey, the more I began to feel the world around me shift. Friends started to notice my softer demeanor, the subtle changes in my clothing, my growing confidence. Some were kind, others less so. I remember one lunch break at work, a colleague, half joking, said, "You're looking different lately. Trying a new look." I laughed it off, but my chest tightened. When I got home, my wife was waiting for me, and she could tell instantly something was wrong. "It's okay," she said before I even spoke. "They don't have to understand. You just have to keep being honest with yourself." And that was when I realized honesty wasn't just about telling the truth. It was about living it. A few weeks later, she scheduled the first consultation. I didn't know whether to be excited or terrified. The night before, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heartbeat echo through the quiet. My wife rolled over and placed her hand on my chest. "You're not losing anything," she whispered. "You're just becoming everything you were meant to be." And somehow, in that moment, I believed her completely. The drive to the clinic felt like stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I was ready to have. Every streetlight we passed painted fleeting patterns on the car's windows, like soft flashes of all the versions of myself I had hidden away. My wife's hand rested on mine the entire time, grounding me through the hum of the engine. The building wasn't what I expected. It wasn't sterile or intimidating. It looked more like a wellness center, quiet, modern, full of light. The receptionist smiled, asked for my name, and spoke it gently. It was strange how even that small act, hearing my name spoken in a tone of kindness, made my throat tighten. We waited in the lounge. I glanced around nervously, pretending to read one of the magazines scattered on the table. Every sound, the soft music, the pages turning, felt amplified. My wife squeezed my hand again, whispering, "Just breathe. This is where change begins, not ends." When they called us in, my heart thudded like a drum. The consultation room was calm, decorated with framed quotes about authenticity and healing. The doctor, a woman with a calm voice and empathetic eyes, began asking me questions that no one had ever asked before. "How long have you known? What does comfort mean to you? When you look in the mirror, what do you see?" Each question felt like a door opening inside me. And behind every door was another truth I had buried beneath years of pretending. By the end of the session, I felt exhausted, but lighter. She didn't promise miracles. She offered understanding, and that was something I hadn't realized I needed so desperately. When we walked back to the car, I couldn't speak for a while. The world outside looked the same, but something inside had shifted quietly, like the air right before dawn. My wife didn't rush me. She just let me sit in silence, processing it all. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror again. My reflection wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The necklace she gave me glimmered faintly under the bathroom light. I touched it and whispered, "Thank you," not sure whether I was speaking to her, to fate, or to the version of myself that had finally found a voice. Over the next weeks, small changes began, not dramatic, but symbolic. My wardrobe softened. My habits shifted. Even the way I carried myself changed. My wife would notice and smile, not in surprise, but in quiet pride. One evening, while I was brushing my hair, she appeared behind me in the mirror. "Do you see her now?" she asked softly. I froze. My throat felt tight again. "I think so," I whispered. "She's still a little afraid, though." "She's allowed to be," she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "But she's also allowed to exist." I didn't cry often, but that night I did. It wasn't sadness. It was release, the kind that comes when you stop holding your breath after years of silence. From then on, every day carried new meaning. Even small moments, hearing my wife call me by my new name, catching my reflection in a shop window, painting my nails for the first time, felt monumental. But not everyone understood. My parents' voices over the phone became distant. Friends avoided certain topics. Some colleagues at work offered awkward smiles. It was painful, but also clarifying. I began to see who truly cared, who saw me, and not just the person I used to be. One night, sitting by the window, I asked my wife, "Why are you still here? Why do you believe in me this much?" She smiled, brushing my hair behind my ear. "Because," she said simply, "I see the woman I fell in love with. She was just waiting for you to notice her too." And in that moment, I realized love wasn't about who we used to be. It was about who we help each other become. As days turned into weeks, that understanding became my foundation. Every doubt, every fear, every whisper of shame slowly melted beneath the quiet strength she gave me. And the night before the final step, before everything would change forever, she looked at me, her voice trembling with emotion. "Tomorrow," she said, "you'll finally see what I've seen all along." Morning came too quickly. I barely slept that night, not from fear, but from a restless kind of anticipation that trembled just beneath my skin. The faint light of dawn stretched through the curtains, tracing soft golden lines across the bed. My wife was still asleep beside me, her hand resting gently over mine as if she could sense my unease even in her dreams. I stared at the ceiling for a long while, breathing in the quiet, trying to convince myself that what was about to happen wasn't a dream. It wasn't fantasy anymore. It was real, scheduled, paid for, prepared. Today wasn't just a date on the calendar. It was the day I'd cross a threshold I could never uncross. My wife woke slowly, her voice still soft and raspy from sleep. "You're thinking too much again," she murmured, turning toward me with that same sleepy smile that had steadied me for years. I managed a weak laugh. "Can you blame me? I feel like the world's about to tilt." She reached over, brushed my hair back, and kissed my forehead. "Let it. You've spent your whole life standing still to keep everyone else steady. It's your turn now." Those words hit something deep, like warmth blooming in the coldest part of my chest. The drive to the clinic was silent at first, but not the kind of silence that felt empty. It was full, heavy with everything we didn't have to say. The radio played quietly, an old love song, one she used to hum absent-mindedly while cooking, and I remember thinking how absurdly normal it all felt, even as my heart raced with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. At the entrance, the glass doors reflected both of us, me in my soft cardigan and jeans, her in that navy dress she wore when she wanted to seem unshakable. For a moment, I caught our reflections together and saw something almost poetic. Two versions of strength, standing side by side, holding each other upright. Inside, the waiting area was peaceful. A few people sat scattered around, each lost in their own quiet stories. The air smelled faintly of lavender. My wife held my hand the whole time, her thumb tracing small circles on my palm. When they finally called my name, I felt that small tremor again, the mixture of fear and freedom that always came with change. The nurse smiled kindly as she led us down a corridor lined with soft lights. "You ready?" she asked, her tone gentle but knowing. "I think so," I whispered. "You're stronger than you think," she said, opening the door. Inside, the room was calm, almost too calm. The doctor went over everything again, the routine, the recovery, the changes. I barely heard half of it. My focus kept drifting to my wife's face, calm, confident, but with tears glimmering just behind her eyes. At one point, she reached out and whispered, "When you wake up, just remember, you're coming home to yourself." That sentence stayed with me like a heartbeat. The next thing I remember is the soft rhythm of a monitor beeping somewhere near my head. My eyelids felt heavy, my thoughts like scattered pieces of light trying to come together. A voice broke through the haze. Gentle, familiar. "Hey, you're okay. You did it." My wife's voice. I opened my eyes, and there she was, smiling, teary-eyed, holding my hand as if I were something fragile and precious. I didn't fully understand what had changed yet. The bandages, the weight, the strange new sensation that wasn't pain so much as presence. But I saw it in her expression. She saw me. And in that instant, something shifted so profoundly that words could never capture it. When I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracked. "I can't believe it's real." Her thumb brushed my cheek. "It's been real for a long time," she said softly. "You're just finally catching up to it." That night, in the quiet of the recovery room, I watched the city lights shimmer through the window. My body ached, but my soul, for the first time, felt still. I thought of all the years I had hidden, all the versions of myself I had abandoned out of fear, and how she had found them all, one by one, and brought them back to life. And as I drifted toward sleep, I realized this wasn't just a transformation. It was a reconciliation between who I was, who I pretended to be, and who I was always meant to become. The first morning after surgery felt unreal. The soft hum of machines had been replaced by something even quieter, the sound of my own breathing. My wife sat near the window, sipping coffee from a paper cup, her hair messy, her eyes tired but bright. When she noticed me stirring, she set the cup down and smiled, that warm, steady smile that always seemed to say you're safe now. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I blinked at the ceiling. "Different," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Like the air feels new." She reached for my hand, her fingers gentle but firm. "That's because it's your first day breathing as yourself." Her words settled over me like sunlight breaking through mist. I turned my head slightly, feeling the faint pull of healing skin, and for the first time, it didn't scare me. It grounded me. I wasn't just existing in this body anymore, I was inhabiting it. When the nurse came to check on me, she smiled and said something about how calm I seemed. I wanted to tell her that calm wasn't quite the word. It was something deeper, something like peace, but heavier, richer. By afternoon, the doctor came in, explaining recovery instructions. My wife listened carefully, nodding at every detail, while I watched the light shift across the floor, thinking about how much I had resisted this day, how many excuses I had built over the years to avoid facing it. But here I was, no longer the hesitant, apologetic version of myself who feared what others might think. The mirror of my mind was clearing, and beneath the fog, I could finally see a reflection that felt true. Later that evening, when they let me stand, my legs trembled. My wife helped steady me. My reflection caught the edge of a glass cabinet, bandaged, fragile, imperfect, but somehow still beautiful. For a second, I almost didn't recognize myself. Then slowly I did. "You're seeing it now, aren't you?" my wife said quietly. I nodded, eyes stinging. "It's me." "Finally," she whispered. Leaving the clinic felt symbolic, like walking out of an old life and into a softer one. The air outside was crisp, scented with rain and city dust. We moved slowly, each step deliberate, like learning to walk again. The ride home was silent, but not heavy this time. She kept one hand resting on my thigh, as if to remind me that I wasn't doing this alone. When we reached home, she opened the door for me, a small gesture, but somehow monumental. Inside, everything looked the same but felt different. My reflection in the hallway mirror made me stop. The bandages, the tired eyes, the traces of swelling. None of it mattered. What I saw was realness. A person who had been buried beneath expectation, fear, and guilt was now standing in plain sight. That night, she helped me settle in bed. I watched her move around the room, turning off lights, adjusting curtains. I couldn't stop watching her, not because of how she looked, but because of what she had done. She had seen through every layer of disguise I had built and refused to let me disappear inside them. When she finally lay down beside me, she pressed her forehead to mine. "You don't owe the world explanations," she whispered. "You only owe yourself honesty." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for years," I said quietly. "Then exhale," she replied.
So I did.
The sound was shaky, uneven, but freeing. Days passed in a gentle rhythm of recovery. Soft clothes, warm soup, whispered laughter. She handled everything, from cleaning the dressings to keeping me distracted with stories about when we first met. I found myself watching her more, her grace, her humor, her calm. I realized that her love wasn't about tolerating me. It was about seeing me. One evening, she brought me a small box wrapped in pink paper. I frowned. "What's this?" "Just open it." Inside was a simple silk robe, pale lavender, light as air. She helped me into it, adjusting the collar gently. "You always said you wanted something soft to wear after everything was over," she said with a small smile. When I looked in the mirror again, the image staring back wasn't tentative or afraid. She looked serene, delicate, yes, but strong in the quiet way that storms are strong after they pass. "Do you like her?" my wife asked from behind me, her voice teasing but tender. I smiled at the reflection, at myself. "I think I finally do." That night, I sat by the window long after she fell asleep. The city lights shimmered across the glass, and for the first time, I didn't see them as distant or unreachable. They felt like pieces of me, scattered across the skyline, waiting, glowing, alive. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. I had never been so nervous to open a front door. It was 3 weeks after the surgery, and though my body was still healing, my wife insisted I was ready for a walk, just a short one around the block. "You can't stay hidden forever," she said gently that morning, helping me with my clothes. "You've spent too long being invisible." Invisible. That word lingered like a shadow on my tongue. I had lived most of my life behind half-closed doors, afraid of being seen. But now, the idea of being unseen frightened me more. She had picked out a soft pastel sweater for me, the kind that felt like a whisper against the skin, and a pair of comfortable jeans. My hair, still short but growing, framed my face unevenly, and she insisted on brushing it until it looked perfectly imperfect. When she handed me a pair of sunglasses, I hesitated. "To hide?" I asked. She smiled.
"No.
To give you time to adjust to your own light." Outside, the air was crisp, almost playful. The street was quiet, just the distant hum of cars, the bark of a neighbor's dog, and a boy riding his bike past the corner. Every sound felt sharper somehow, as if the world had turned its volume up just for me. My steps were small at first, uncertain. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. No one looked at me, at least not the way I feared they would. The woman walking her baby smiled and nodded politely. A man trimming his hedges glanced up and waved. The sun touched my face, and for the first time, I didn't flinch from it. I let it stay. "See?" my wife whispered beside me. "The world doesn't know you as you were. It only knows you as you are now." Her words gave me courage, but still, I caught myself watching for reactions. A double take, a curious stare, anything that could confirm my lingering fear of being judged. But it never came. The world didn't stop spinning because of me. And somehow, that was freeing. We reached the small park at the end of the street, the same one we used to visit before everything changed. I remembered sitting there once, years ago, watching people go by, wondering what it would feel like to just be without the weight of pretending. That old memory drifted through me like a ghost, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for the person I used to be, so quiet, so afraid of joy. We sat on a bench. My wife reached into her bag and pulled out 2 cups of coffee. "Same order as always," she said, handing one to me. I took a sip, the warmth grounding me. The taste hadn't changed, but I had. "It feels strange," I murmured after a while. "Being out here. Like I'm in the same world, but not." She nodded. "Because you're finally seeing it through your own eyes." That simple truth made me tear up. My reflection in the coffee lid shimmered back at me, soft hair, healed skin, a face that finally looked aligned with the voice in my head. I looked peaceful. Maybe not perfect, but real. When we started walking back, a breeze swept through, tugging lightly at my hair. I laughed, an instinctive, surprised sound. My wife turned to me, eyes bright. "I've missed that," she said. "Missed what?" "Your laugh. It used to sound like you were apologizing for it. Now it sounds like it belongs to you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been an apology for existing, for wanting, for feeling out of place. Every smile, every gesture had been a careful edit to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. But walking beside her now, with the soft rhythm of our steps matching, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't want to hide behind the version of me that had survived. I wanted to live as the one who was finally alive. Back home, I stood before the mirror again, the same one that had witnessed every breakdown, every silent rehearsal of what I might look like someday. Now, someday was here. My hands trembled as I touched the edge of the mirror, tracing the reflection. I saw the faint curve of my chest beneath the sweater, the soft shape of my jawline, the eyes that no longer looked haunted. "I think I'm starting to recognize her," I whispered. My wife appeared behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist, resting her chin on my shoulder. "She's been waiting for you for a long time." We stayed like that, quiet, still, our reflections merging into one shape. I realized then that this transformation wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply human. It was about reclaiming every fragment of myself I had abandoned along the way. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my younger sister. "Mom said she saw your photos. You look beautiful. She's proud of you." I stared at the message for a long time before tears blurred the screen. My wife took the phone from my trembling hands and smiled softly. "See," she said. "You were never losing them. You were just finding you." That night, I didn't need the sunglasses anymore. I walked out to the porch, barefoot, feeling the cool concrete under my feet. The moon was full, round, glowing, unapologetically itself. I looked up, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wish to be anyone else. Because she, the person I had spent years hiding from, was already here. The next morning, the light through the curtains looked different. It wasn't harsh or judging like before. It felt soft, like the world had decided to give me a quiet welcome. Still, I couldn't ignore the nervous flutter in my stomach. Today wasn't about just walking outside. It was about facing people again. My family.
My past.
My wife had planned it days ago. "They need to see you, really see you," she'd said. I agreed, though my hands had been shaking ever since. She reminded me gently that no one can meet the real you until you do. So I tried to start from there. We drove to my parents' house, a place that felt frozen in time. Like every photo and memory there still belonged to the version of me that didn't fit. The car ride was quiet, filled with small glances between us. I could feel her confidence in me like a steady heartbeat beside mine, even when mine faltered. When we arrived, my mother opened the door, before I could even knock. She looked at me for a long moment, not confused, not angry, just studying. I felt my pulse quicken, waiting for the words that might cut. But instead, she smiled faintly, eyes softening. "You've always had your grandmother's eyes," she said quietly. I just didn't notice before. The tension in my chest cracked like ice thawing in spring. She didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't make a speech. She just opened her arms, and I walked into them. For the first time in years, I felt the comfort of that simple embrace. No conditions, no corrections. When we went inside, my dad was sitting in his armchair, the television murmuring in the background. He turned his head, his eyes settling on me, then flicking briefly toward my wife. I could tell he was processing everything slowly, this new image of me that probably didn't fit his old mental picture. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then, with a quiet sigh, he turned off the TV. "Coffee?" he asked. It was his way of saying I'm trying. And I nodded. "Yes, please." The conversation that followed wasn't full of explanations. Instead, it was full of pauses, little smiles, and old stories, things that reminded me I still belonged somewhere. My father didn't say he understood, but when he poured me a cup and asked if I still took 2 sugars, I knew enough. Later, as we were leaving, my mother stopped me on the porch. "You look peaceful," she said. "That's all a parent really wants to see." I could have cried right there, but I didn't. I just whispered, "Thank you," and hoped she heard everything else that came with it. The drive home was silent again, but this time it was a good silence. My wife reached over, resting her hand on mine as the city lights passed us by. "You handled that beautifully," she said. "You didn't hide." I smiled faintly. I was tired of hiding. That night, I found myself scrolling through old photos, ones from years ago that didn't feel like me anymore. The awkward smiles, the uncomfortable posture, the eyes that seemed to be searching for someone who wasn't there. I almost deleted them but stopped. Maybe they deserved to stay, as reminders of what I overcame. I opened a new folder on my phone and titled it Becoming Me. Inside it, I placed a photo my wife had taken that morning, me standing by the window, soft light catching the edge of my hair, a faint smile on my lips. I looked unsure, but real. I wasn't performing anymore. I was existing. That small act, saving that picture, felt like reclaiming my story. Over the next few weeks, the world didn't suddenly turn into a perfect place. There were moments when I caught strangers staring a second too long, moments when I overheard a whisper that made my skin tighten. But those moments passed. They didn't hold power like they once did. Because for every awkward glance, there was a kind smile, a nod of quiet respect, or a conversation that reminded me that people could surprise you. One afternoon, while walking through a bookstore, a young woman approached me shyly. "Sorry," she said. "I just wanted to say, I like your hair. It's really pretty." It was such a small thing, but it hit me deeply. Because a year ago, that same comment would have terrified me. I would have overanalyzed it, wondered what she really meant. But this time, I simply smiled and said, "Thank you." That night, I told my wife about it. She grinned.
See?
The world's starting to reflect what you already knew inside. And maybe she was right. Maybe the world hadn't changed at all. Maybe it was me who finally did. Still, late at night, when I looked in the mirror, I sometimes whispered the old name under my breath, not out of regret but as a quiet goodbye. A nod to the person who got me this far, even when everything hurt. I owed them gratitude, not shame. As I crawled into bed beside my wife that evening, she brushed her hand across my shoulder and whispered, "You're glowing again." And I finally felt it, not just on my skin but deep inside, a warmth that came from living as truthfully as I could. For the first time, my reflection didn't need permission to exist. It started with a post I didn't plan to write. One quiet evening, I sat in front of my laptop, staring at the blinking cursor. I wasn't sure why I'd opened the page, maybe out of habit, or maybe because something inside me wanted to stop hiding, not just from my family this time, but from the whole world. I began typing. Slowly at first, then faster. I wrote about fear, the kind that lives in your chest for years, feeding on silence. I wrote about pretending, about looking in mirrors that never reflected the truth. I wrote about my wife, about how she didn't turn me into something new, but helped me see what was already there. And then I stopped. My finger hovered over post. It wasn't courage I felt, it was exhaustion. I was tired of waiting for a perfect moment to be real. So I clicked it. For a while, nothing happened. I sat there, watching the glow of the screen as if it might somehow change me back. But then the notifications started. At first, they came slowly. A few likes, a few heart emojis, a short "proud of you." Then the comments grew, one after another. People I hadn't spoken to in years, classmates, co-workers, even a distant cousin, all chiming in with surprise, curiosity, and support. Some messages were cautious, like people learning a new language of kindness. Others were raw and heartfelt, strangers who told me my words made them feel seen for the first time. But there were also messages that stung, the kind that came from misunderstanding, or fear, or simple cruelty dressed as concern. I read them all. I let the sting sit there, but I didn't let it win. Because for once, the world's noise didn't drown me out. A week later, my post had been shared dozens of times. Someone messaged me from a small community page asking if I'd like to share my story in a video interview. I froze. The idea of putting my face to the story made my stomach twist. It wasn't just about being seen, it was about being known. There's a difference. When I told my wife, she didn't push me. She just said, "If your heart says yes, I'll be behind the camera." So I said yes. The day of the recording, I sat in a small studio that smelled faintly of coffee and light powder. The interviewer, a woman in her 30s, smiled warmly. "Just speak like you're telling a friend," she said. And I did. I told her about confusion, shame, laughter, hope, all tangled together in the same long, messy road that led me here. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't try to be poetic. I just told the truth. The truth, it turned out, was powerful enough. When the video went live, I expected maybe a handful of people to see it. But by the end of the week, it had thousands of views. Messages poured in again, this time from around the world. Men and women, young and old, writing things like, "I've never told anyone, but your story sounds like mine. You helped me stop hating myself. I showed this to my sister, so she could understand me." Reading those words felt like touching something sacred. All the fear, the hiding, the hesitation, it suddenly seemed worth it. But with visibility came a new kind of pressure. The world wanted to define me again, just in a different way. Some called me brave.
Some called me confused.
Some wanted me to be an icon. Others wanted me to disappear. One night, I told my wife, I didn't mean to become a symbol. She smiled softly. "You didn't. You became yourself. The world just noticed." Her words stayed with me. In the months that followed, I started writing regularly, not essays or confessions, but reflections. Pieces about authenticity, about learning to forgive the parts of myself I used to despise. It wasn't activism. It wasn't performance. It was healing, written in plain sentences. Somewhere along the way, the fear of judgment turned into something else, compassion. Because now I understood what it meant when someone said, "I see you." It wasn't about approval. It was about recognition. One evening, while walking through a park, a teenager approached me shyly. She'd recognized me from the interview. "I showed your story to my mom," she said, nervously fidgeting with her sleeve. "We don't fight anymore." She said she finally understands. I smiled, holding back tears. "That's all I ever hoped for," I whispered. When I got home that night, I sat in front of the mirror again, the same mirror where I used to see everything wrong with me. But this time I didn't analyze the makeup, or the hair, or the details. I just looked,
And I saw peace.
not perfection, not transformation, just peace, the quiet kind that doesn't need an audience. As I turned off the light, my reflection faded into the soft dark, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Because now, even in the dark, I knew who I was. It started with a message that almost went unnoticed. Buried in a sea of social notifications, it was simple, just a few lines, no profile picture, no name. "I don't know who else to talk to. I think I'm like you, but I'm scared." The words hit me harder than I expected. It felt like I was staring into a mirror that showed me not as I am now, but as I once was, confused, trembling, and desperate for someone who wouldn't laugh or look away. I replied, slowly, carefully, "You don't have to be scared with me. Start wherever you want." That's how I met Eli, though he wouldn't tell me his name for weeks. He said he was 19, working part-time, living with parents who thought boys should be boys. His messages were cautious, written like someone tiptoeing through a minefield of their own emotions. He didn't ask about clothes or makeup. He asked about feeling. "What does it feel like," he wrote once, "to stop pretending?" That question stayed with me all night. The next morning, I replied with the only truth I knew. "It feels like breathing after holding your breath for years. It's not easy, and sometimes it hurts, but it's real." For weeks, we spoke every night. Sometimes about little things, the way foundation never sits right under certain lighting, or the fear of bumping into someone you know while shopping for eyeliner. Other times, our talks went deeper, into identity, family, and the aching loneliness that comes from hiding too long. My wife knew about our talks. She'd smile and say, "He's lucky to have you," though she never called me a mentor.
She knew I didn't see it that way.
To me, Eli wasn't a project. He was a reflection of a younger me still trapped in silence. One day, he finally sent a photo, not of himself, but of a small notebook filled with doodles and words. Across the page, written in bright blue ink, were the words, "Someday I'll walk out as myself." Something about that line broke me open. I remembered my own someday. The endless planning, the waiting for permission that never came. So I told him what my wife once told me. There's no perfect day to begin. There's just the day you stop hiding from yourself. He didn't reply right away. But 2 days later, he sent another message. I bought a simple pink hoodie. I wore it home. My heart didn't stop this time. I smiled through tears. That tiny sentence, "my heart didn't stop," meant everything. Because sometimes, victory doesn't look like applause or dramatic change. It looks like breathing normally while being yourself. Over the next few months, Eli grew bolder. His words became lighter. He'd write things like, "I smiled at my reflection today," or "I think my sister knows, but she's being cool about it." Then one evening, he wrote something different. "I want to tell my mom." My chest tightened as I read it. That was the mountain, the one every journey eventually leads to. We talked it through for hours. What to say, what not to say, how to hold steady if things didn't go perfectly. At the end of it, I said, "Whatever happens, you'll still be you. That's the only part that matters." Days passed. No messages. Then one night, my phone lit up. I told her.
She cried.
But she hugged me. She said she doesn't understand yet, but she'll try. I think that's enough. I stared at those words for a long time. It was like watching a spark catch fire in the dark, gentle, trembling, but real. Later that night, I told my wife. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's your full circle." And I knew she was right, because all along I thought my journey was about becoming. But maybe it was always about giving. The same acceptance that had saved me was now reaching someone else, rippling outward. Weeks later, Eli sent one last message before disappearing from social media for a while. "I think I'm ready to start living instead of hiding. Thank you for showing me how." I smiled and whispered to the quiet room, "You did that yourself." That night, as I stood by the window, the world outside looked calm, soft lights glowing through curtains, the faint hum of traffic. My reflection in the glass didn't frighten me anymore. For the first time, I felt something deeper than happiness. It was peace mixed with purpose. Like I had finally found where my story was meant to lead. And as I turned off the lights, I thought, maybe healing isn't a destination at all. Maybe it's the act of helping someone else find their way in the dark, until they, too, discover their own light. The morning of my first post-surgery checkup felt strange. Not because of the hospital smell or the distant hum of machines, but because of how ordinary everything suddenly felt. For months I had imagined this day as something spectacular, dramatic music, tears, maybe even a cinematic breeze. Instead, it was just quiet sunlight spilling through the car window as my wife drove us downtown, her fingers resting gently over mine on the gear shift. "Are you nervous?" she asked, glancing at me with that half-smile I'd fallen in love with long before I ever found the courage to become myself. "Not nervous," I said softly. "Just aware." She laughed under her breath. You always find the poetic word. At the clinic, the nurse guided me through the checkup, her voice calm, kind, and free of the careful pity I used to fear. When the doctor finished, he said something simple, but heavy with meaning. Everything looks perfect. You're healing beautifully. I looked at my wife, and for the first time in my life, the word beautifully didn't sound like something meant for someone else. That night, after dinner, we sat together on the balcony. The city below buzzed with life, but up here, it was just us, her warm hand on my thigh, my head resting against her shoulder, the stars quietly blinking above the skyline. Do you ever regret it? I asked without looking at her. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over, brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, and said, "Not for a second. I didn't lose a husband, love. I gained the person you were always meant to be." Her voice trembled a little at the end. I turned toward her, and the reflection in her eyes showed me something I had never allowed myself to see. Not a man who had changed, but a woman who had arrived. I wanted to thank her, to pour out everything I felt, but all I could manage was a whisper. "You saved me." She smiled. "You saved yourself. I just paid the bill." We both laughed, the kind of laugh that happens when all the tears have already been cried. In the months that followed, life slowly found its rhythm again. The mirror became an old friend instead of a stranger. My voice softened, not because I practiced, but because the tension that once lived in my chest was finally gone. Sometimes I'd still think about Eli, wondering how his story was unfolding, if his mother was still trying to understand. I hoped, in my heart, that he was somewhere smiling at his own reflection. One evening, I found myself standing before the same mirror where my journey had truly begun. My fingertips traced the faint scars that had already begun to fade. They were no longer reminders of what I'd lost. They were signatures of the life I had chosen. Behind me, my wife called out from the kitchen, "Tea or coffee, sweetheart?" "Tea," I said. My voice carried so naturally that it startled me. It wasn't practiced or performed. It was just me. As I joined her, she slid a mug toward me and said, "You know, I think you've stopped chasing who you are." I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "You used to wake up every morning trying to become something. Now you just are." Her words landed softly but deeply, like sunlight on still water. We clinked our mugs together. Outside, the evening sky blushed a quiet pink, almost the same shade as the hoodie Eli had once written about. And for the first time, I realized the story wasn't just about surgeries or clothes or even courage. It was about love, the kind that doesn't change you, but frees you to change yourself. I took a slow breath, smiled at her, and said, "I think this is what peace feels like." She reached over, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "You've earned it." The kettle clicked off behind us. The city lights flickered to life. And somewhere deep inside, I finally stopped holding my breath.